U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is continuing his tour of the Middle East. He says he made clear to Israel that Palestinians in Gaza must be allowed to return to their homes as soon as conditions allow. And while Israel repeatedly says that it is moving to a new, less intense phase of the war, heavy bombardment of the enclave is so far relentless. The IDF says it aims for proportionality and precision in its military operations. Our next guest tonight paints a very different picture. Yuval Abraham is investigative reporter for Israel's Plus 972 magazine, which is jointly run by Israelis and Palestinians. And he joins me from Tel Aviv to discuss his reporting. Yuval, thank you so much for joining us now. Your investigation discusses the IDF's, quote, expanded authorization for bombing non-military targets and the, quote, loosening of constraints regarding expected civilian casualties. Talk to us about what you found in your reporting and how that lies in contrast with how the IDF says it's conducting this war, in your view.
Yeah, so I found three main things. The first is that the military completely abandoned previous protocols that were in place aimed at regulating the killing of Palestinian civilians. So for this operation, for example, in assassination strikes aimed at senior Hamas commanders, sources in intelligence have told me that the military is knowingly killing several hundred Palestinian civilians per assassination attempt. The second thing is that the military is heavily relying on artificial intelligence to generate targets for such assassinations with very little human supervision, according to sources. And finally, the last thing is that there is this concept in the military called power targets, which are targets that are hit not for their military value, but because it's a way to hurt morale in Gaza and to cause civilians to place pressure on Hamas. And my investigation on Plus 972 magazine and Local Call, it's based on 7 intelligence sources, and I am continuing to speak to these intelligence sources also in the past few weeks.
I want to ask more about, without revealing your sources, just the type of sources you have and the access and why they would have the access that they do. We should note that CNN's reporting cannot confirm your investigation and its findings. The IDF, we should note, says in a statement that they are committed to international law and acts according to it, and in doing so attacks military targets and does not attack civilians, also seeks to minimize civilian casualties. You said something earlier that stuck with me. I'm not a military expert. Our viewers aren't either, but we've been watching this war almost 24/7 for the past 3 months unfold on television. How Israel is conducting this war, obviously a much larger scale following a terrible, horrific terror attack of October 7th, but it's in an enclave and it's against a terror group it is very familiar with. How are they conducting this war with Hamas differently than they have in past wars?
Yeah, so I just have to say, so in response to the military saying that it is doing everything in its power to minimize civilians' casualties, that's just not true. And I'm saying that it's not true because, just this week I've spoken with roughly 3 Israeli intelligence officers who were actually planning these targets for the past few months. And they tell me that the general atmosphere is an atmosphere where Palestinian life has very, very little meaning. And to answer your question, the previous protocols that were in place, for example, in previous wars, in an assassination attempt against a senior Hamas commander, they would normally not allow more than 5 civilians to be killed, sometimes several dozen. Now, in this operation, it's several hundred Palestinian civilians being killed per assassination attempt. And as a blanket sort of rule for any sort of assassination strike, up to between 15 to 20 Palestinian civilians. Now, the use of artificial intelligence is so massive in this operation that by the second week, most of the target creation process, according to sources, already became automated. And sources that were there and they were operating these AI-generated target machines said that most of the targets created were junior Hamas operatives that were being bombed, again, when they are in their homes, killing not only them, but up to between 15 to 20 Palestinian civilians, entire families around them.
You mentioned
this was not in place in previous wars.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up artificial intelligence and its role in this war. You specifically write about a tool called the Gospel. Tell us more about how it's being used.
Sure. So the gospel is just one system out of several systems that essentially compose these target-creating machines. And what they do, they surveil, they collect information from the entire population of Gaza, so 2.3 million people, and they calculate the probability that a certain individual is associated with Hamas, and the probability that a certain individual is associated with a particular phone number, for example. And they do so on a massive scale, generating hundreds of targets every day. Now, sources have told me that the military knows that these systems are not always accurate, and the policy is not a zero-mistake policy. The military has commented to my piece and said that a human is always in the loop with artificial intelligence. And I'll just give you an example, okay? I've recently met a source who has operated these machines, and he told me that he bombed dozens of homes every day. And I asked him how many of these homes were created by artificial intelligence as targets for assassination. And he said all of them. I just have to green light it. And I asked him, well, how much time did you spend per target, looking, supervising what the machine created? And the source said that there were weeks, that there was so much pressure to create as many targets as possible, that he spent 20 seconds per target. And the supervision was to check if the AI generated target for assassination is a male or a female. If it's a female, they know it's for sure a mistake the AI made, because women are not supposed to be generated as targets. And if it's a male, they would authorize it because according to that source, because it's not 100%, but probable that this is a Hamas person. And in each one of these strikes that were being authorized, we have civilians being killed as well.
Yuval, you mentioned earlier, and again, I don't want to jeopardize your sources, but I saw in a recent interview you'd given that these are sources that are either connected to the military or connected to these operations and that want to ensure the security and safety of Israel. That having been said, why are they choosing to speak with you about this right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, talking to these sources, like all of them after October 7th happened, the shock, the atrocities, they immediately, some of them volunteered to go to the army, some of them are in reserves, and gradually they were shocked, honestly, by what they were asked to do, by how many of them were shocked by how much it was disproportionate. And I think a lot of them felt a responsibility really to share this information with the Israeli public and with the international public, and especially with the US that is largely funding this war, because there is such a big disparity. Every time I finish a conversation with an intelligence source, I cannot believe the disparity between the way this war is being portrayed in the media and the way it actually is on the ground. And I think a lot of sources felt a responsibility to change that, to speak about it.